Good day to all. For Module 5, our last topic or last module, so we will be discussing additional theory concepts. These concepts are additional discussions to enhance or improve basic concepts, or these can be advanced concepts. We will also be discussing factors affecting WACC, both internal and external to the company, treatment of rotation costs, because in DDM or DCF model, that's one treatment. We will discuss the other treatment and problems in the estimates used for cost of capital. Okay, next is on the various additional theory concepts. Okay, the first one that we would like to discuss is on the capital structure. When we started the basic hierarchy that we use for capital structure, this is based on usual problems. So, say yung binibigay, you get the target capital structure. If it's not given, you compute for the market value, you get the market values. If not, you use the book values. Okay? But to be more specific, you can subdivide the capital structure priority into two, the target and the current structure. Mas madaling tignan yung current structure kasi tignan mo lang yung FS. Kung ano nakalagay doon, book value. Pero priority mo, if you can compute for the market value, then better. However, the target structure, in which it is quite theoretical, okay? The point is, this structure is the one that will maximize shareholder value. The details of this one will be discussed in the next topic, how we come up with this one. So it can be based also with based on book or market values. So the premise now is you use the target, either based first on the market value and book value. Next is, next priority is current, a structure based on the FS, but you prioritize the market values of the figures in the FS, and if there will be none, so use the book values. Okay. Next is on the optimal capital structure. It is on the time frame. It is the target structure for a specific period of time, but it is not permanent. So it may change because it may change over time because conditions about the company may change over time, both internal or micro to the company, or external or macroeconomic factors. Internal factors such as probably investment decisions, dividend decisions, legal decisions. External factors, maybe interest rates or recession and other factors which affect the economy as a whole. Okay. Next, ito siguro isa sa pinaka mabigat, pinaka malalim na concept. Okay? I think probably not all financial experts or financial analysts will agree to this one, but I believe that this is a very important concept. Okay? In what? That is, the cost of capital depends primarily or ultimately on the use of funds, not on the source. Initially, we can say that cost of capital depends on the source. Why? Because when we compute for the WACC, we start with the WACC of the company to get the project cost of capital. We take into consideration the cost of the components. The cost of the components depend on the investors. Diba? Kung kanino galing. Kapag mataas ang requirement nila, mas mataas ang cost natin, either for debt, preferred stock, or common stock. However, at the end of the day, what do we do to determine the final project cost of capital? After computing for the WACC of the company, based on the sources, we look at the risk of the projects, where we will use the funds raised. And if the risk of the projects are high, we adjust up the WACC to compute for the project cost of capital, or adjust it down. So initially, tinitingnan talaga natin yung source. Pero ultimately, we look at where we put our money, the money raised, because that will determine our project cost of capital. And remember, the primary use of cost of capital or WACC is for capital budgeting purposes. So yun yung line of thinking natin. And then on the risk-free rate, okay, using CAPM to compute for the cost of equity, the risk-free rate is represented by the T-bill rate. However, financial analysts, and actually in application, in actual scenario, I think they use this one. They use the T-bond rate rather, specifically for a 10-year treasury bond. Why? Because they say, financial analysts say that since cost of equity is computed and equity is long-term, we should use an appropriate rate for the risk-free rate, which is also long-term. comparing risk T-bill rate to T-bond rate is more appropriate because it's long term. Okay? Next is on the factors affecting WACC. We'll first discuss the factors that the firms cannot control. Yung ano yan, mga macro, external. First is on interest rates. So what will happen if interest rate will increase? Of course, you know, if interest rate will increase, before tax cost of debt will increase, after tax cost of debt will increase, therefore our WACC will increase. Okay? And then for the stock prices, if the stock prices will increase using the DDM or the DCF model, all other things held constant, an increase in stock price will decrease the cost of equity, hence will decrease the WACC. And then for the taxes, specifically if it's silent, we're talking about income taxes. Taxes affect the cost of debt. If the income taxes will increase, our tax savings will increase, therefore decreasing the after-tax cost of debt, hence the WACC will decrease. However, if we're talking about other forms of taxes, such as taxes on the income of the shareholders, meaning the capital gains dividend taxes, what will happen? So basically, if the capital gains taxes and dividend taxes will increase, the preference for dividend will decrease, meaning the demand for stocks will decrease. What will happen if the demand for stocks will decrease? So we'll be using here the concept of demand and equilibrium price, just like in economics. So if your demand for the stocks will decrease, what will happen to the price? Okay, the stock price will decrease. Therefore, using DDM again or DCF, all other things held constant. So imagine nyo lang formula, okay, ng DDM, DCF, kabisado nyo na naman yan. If the stock prices will decrease, then the cost of equity will increase, therefore increasing the WACC. Okay, next is on the factors affecting WACC, which the firms can control, meaning internal to the company. They can influence this one. First one is on the capital structure policy. What if the company decides to use more debt than equity financing? So 60-40, 70-30, so in favor of debt. So a higher WD will be applied to a lower after-tax cost of debt, hence decreases the WACC. For example, you just imagine this example. Para madali, 50-50 na lang. 50% debt, 50% equity. After-tax cost of debt is 5%. After-tax cost of equity rather is 10%. So kalahati lang. So 50% times 5% plus 50% times 10%. So 2.5 plus 5 will be 7.5%. Our WACC is 7.5%. What if we increase the percentage of debt, WD, to 60%, then 40% equity? So meaning 60% times 5% after tax cost of debt, that will be 3%. And then 10% plus 10% times 40%, that will be 4%. So 3% plus 4%, 7%. So nung una, ang WACC natin, 7.5% pag 50-50. Pero pag 60-40 in favor of debt, it will be 7%. So yung ibig sabihin na, a higher debt means a higher WD will be applied to a lower after-tax cost of debt. But, okay? Remember that when a company increases its debt, since there is a debt brings an increase in fixed costs, specifically fixed finance charge, so merong additional risk yan. So pag tumataas ang risk ng company, anong nangyari sa required return ng investors? Both the shareholders and the bondholders, creditors, tumataas din yan. So ibig sabihin, hindi constant si interest rate, RD, saka cost of equity or required return on the stock. So kaya kung titingnan natin, an increase in debt gives two results. Okay? You maximize your tax savings, tendency niya bumaba ang WACC, pero tumataas ang risk. Tumataas ang interest rate saka required return on the stock or cost of equity. So in the next chapter, we'll be discussing the details of this one. So kung titingnan natin, ang effect nito, it can increase the WACC, decrease the WACC, or no effect. Okay? Next is on the dividend policy. So I'll just correct this one. I think may error ako dun sa initial slide na binigay ko. I'll give an updated PowerPoint. Same also with number 1 kasi WC nilagay ko instead of WD. So kinarek ko na siya. So an increase in dividend will decrease the retained earnings. The tendency is that there's a high probability that we will be use more of new common stock This will increase our cost of equity, hence increase the WACC. And lastly is on the capital budgeting decisions. Specifically, we're talking about here of the WACC of the project or project's cost of capital. Remember, in project acceptance, we start with the company's WACC, then we compute the project's WACC by adjusting for the risk. So the higher the company's, the higher the project's risk, or if the project's risk will increase, we also increase the project's cost of capital coming from the WACC of the company. Okay? Now we have your FS, so your break time. So parang dire-diretso. So kahit sa online may FS. So the first to guess the right title will earn a point for himself and for the group. Same goes with the moral lesson. As long as your moral lesson is applicable to the story, you'll earn a point and a point for the group. So there will be one winner for each section for the title and for the lesson. So as long as you were the first to mention that lesson in your section, you'll earn the point, and individual and group one. So here's our FS. A man once caught a thief in the act of picking his pocket. The thief excused himself, saying that he was without work and was starving. He had just finished a term in jail, and with that on his record, he could not find employment. He said that whenever he gave his name, its reputation was so bad that no one will hire or trust him. Well, said the businessman, take my name, which I have never soiled in my life. I give it to you. Take it and keep it clean. He then got the man a job. 15 years later, the businessman was told by his secretary that there was a gentleman to see him. He looked at the visitor's calling card and noticed that both of them had the very same name. When he opened his office door to invite in the visitor, before him stood a well-dressed man of noble appearance, who said, I've called to tell you that today I've been made an executive in the firm to which you recommended me 15 years ago. All you see me to be, I owe to your noble generosity, and above all, to the gift of your name, which is still unsoiled. The title of the story, so 5 words. The first word starts with a V, as in victory. Second word is off. Third word is A. Fourth word starts with G. And the last word, the fifth word starts with N. Okay? So I'll open an area in ELIP where you can answer. So thank you. Next is on the treatment of the flotation costs. So there are 2 basic treatments of the flotation costs. The first is the one that we use in the computation using the DDM or the DCF model. Okay, it is in addition to the cost of capital. So what we do in this one is using the DDM, we deduct the flotation cost from the proceeds. In this case, for example, if our cost of equity is 10% and the price is 100, meaning to simplify, we just assume that there's 0 growth rate. So meaning the dividend is 10 pesos. Diba? 10 pesos divided by 100, you get 10%. So what if there's a flotation cost of 8 pesos? So if it's 8 pesos, you have 10 peso dividend and then divided by 92, so 100 minus 8. So our cost of new common stock will be 10.87% as compared to the cost of retained earnings of 10%. So the logic is that there's a higher cost because the funds that you receive, you need to work harder. Work harder for what? Work harder to give the return required by investors at 10%. And in our case, the effect of the flotation cost, because you need to pay for the flotation cost. The effect of that is that you need to earn higher than 10%. In this case, higher by 0.87% to cover the cost. So basically, we need to cover both costs, the required return by investors and the equivalent effect of the flotation cost. Next is on the addition to the cost of investment. So we apply here the concept of IRR in capital budgeting. So in IRR, we compute for the rate of return or discount rate, which will make the NPV 0, or which will make the same the present value of the benefits and the cost of investment. So for example, if the cost is 100, to simplify, ito yung pinakamadali. I think I've mentioned this one in my classes before. If your cost is 100 and your cash flow after 1 year is 120, so it's for one period, the IRR is 20%. So meaning you look for a rate in which the present value of 120 in 1 year, you go back 1 year, will be the same with 100. So kung titingnan kasi natin, the present value factor of 20% for 1 year is 0.83333. So you multiply 0.8333 by 120, you get 100 or 99.99. Okay? But if you include the flotation cost of 8 on the cost, so the cost now is 108 and the cash flow with after 1 year will be 120 using the same computation, so you'll get an IRR of 12%. So dito, hindi ina-adjust yung flotation cost sa cost of capital. Okay? So no effect on the cost of capital, but the rate of return or IRR on the investment will decrease. So proponents of this one say that this is more appropriate because of actually their point of view is logical, because remember the cost of equity in this case R sub S, okay, should be based on the investors perception, diba? Yun yung require nila. Ano bang basis ng required return nila? Bakit ba yung tumataas o bumababa? Di ba tumataas yan because they basically the cost of equity or the return required by the investors increase because of an increased risk. Tumataas yung risk, kaya tumataas yung required return nila. Pero kasi sa case na to, tumaas yung, kapag ginawa natin yung treatment A, tumaas yung cost of equity or required return of the investors, pero hindi naman lumaki yung risk. So sinasabi nila, since hindi naman tumaas yung risk, kung pakialaman yung required return ng investors or cost of equity, so you adjust it on another factor. In this case, on the cost of investment. Kasi flotation cost, additional cost mo naman talaga yan. Ang effect niya, hindi sa cost of capital, hindi sa cost of equity, doon sa required return on the investment. Okay? Next is on the other problems with cost of capital estimates. Okay? The first one is on the depreciated generated funds. Actually, this topic is an advanced topic in finance. You may encounter this one in higher finance, when you have your post-studies or what. However, to mention the basic concept of this one is net income is added back, or rather depreciation is added back to net income to get the net cash inflow, or depreciation is added back to your operating income to get your operating cash flow. Since this is an available cash, the company can utilize this one. The question is, if the company utilizes this one as a source of fund for investment purposes, does it has a cost? Or do depreciation generated funds have cost? The answer is quite similar with the opportunity cost principle in cost of retained earnings. Since these cash flows or cash from depreciation funds should have been received by all investors, by the preferred holders, common stockholders, and creditors or bondholders, this should have been used. They should have been received by these investors and may have used or invested in other productive activities, earning a return. So basically, the cost of the depreciated generated funds is similar with the cost or with the company's WACC. Okay? Kasi lahat involved yung tatlo eh. So, ang WACC covered yung tatlo. So, the cost of depreciation generated funds is the same with the company's WACC. Next is on the privately owned firms. It is more difficult to get the cost of equity for privately owned firms as compared to public companies. Basically, if you use DDM, the stock prices can be seen in the stock market for public firms. But for privately owned firms, it's difficult to compete for the stock price. Probably you can use the corporate valuation model. So medyo mas mahirap. Okay? Next is on the measurement problems. Okay? Specifically for the three methods in computing for the cost of equity, some if not all of the variables, you need to estimate very well to get a good figure on the cost of equity. For CAPM, the beta and the MRP, the growth rate for DDM or DCF, and the risk premium for the bond yield plus risk premium. That's why when we compute for the cost of retained earnings, if it's silent, we assume that all of the estimates for these methods are of the same accuracy, diba? Unless one is more, we are more confident as to the estimate of one method over the other. Okay? Next, number 4 is in the cost of capital for differing projects. So it's very difficult to determine the risk of a certain project. What if we're talking about different projects of or various projects of different risks? So it makes the analysis of investing decision more difficult if you have different projects with different risks as compared with various projects with the same risk. And lastly, on the capital structure weights. So it's not easy to come up with the best weight of the optimal capital structure. So for problem purposes, it's easy to say the optimal capital structure is 60-40, 70-30, WD, WC. But in reality, it's difficult to determine what is the best structure, what the optimal capital structure is. Okay, so thank you.